Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of learning HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And in today's lesson, we're going to learn and discuss how we can add the table element onto our HTML pages and add some basic CSS and styling to it, because tables is something that we're going to use a lot in future lessons. So let's learn the basics of an HTML table. So let's go ahead and open up our code editor, and I have just that boilerplate of an HTML file defined how it should look. And inside the body, we're going to add the table element, right? So let's go ahead onto Google and search up HTML tables and enter, right? And then we see the first link, W3 Schools. Let's read a little bit about it. HTML tables allow web developers to arrange data into rows and columns, right? Because it's important for us to know what a table is and what functionality it provides us, so that when we're coding, we can always be mindful of that. So here's an example from W3 Schools. You have this table right here, and it's split up into rows and columns, as we all know. Each column has a different data field, and then each row has a different entry or record in there. So you'll see for the first row, technically, the first column has company, the second column has contact, and the third column has country. And then that pattern repeats over and over for each row, right? So that's what we're going to define, and that's what we're going to create. And then if you scroll down, great definition here of each one of the tags required and what it does. And then of course, they'll give you a code snippet of how to code that, right? But let me and you just define it from scratch, just so that we're all aware of how it works. So inside our body, that's where we're going to add our HTML code for this table to be applied. We're going to go ahead and put the main table tag. So there we have it, open, close. Everything that's going to be defined in our table is going to be within these two tags. As we've seen, a table is divided into rows and columns. So let's go ahead and make our first row. And within our first row, let's put two columns, right? So TD. So now we have a table, which is defined with the table tags, a table row tag, which defines our row, and the TD tag, which defines the column. So let's go ahead and put just my name, for example. Let's save, and let's open this file. And then you see, even though technically it doesn't look like a table, what's happening is this is a table that has one row and one column, and all it has is my name, right? But let's go ahead and build it further for this idea to be drilled into our heads, right? So we need many things added to our table, right? The first thing is we want many rows of data, right? We don't just want my first name, we want many people's first name. So that's the first thing that we want. So we want to basically make multiple rows, each one with one column that has a different person's name, right? So there's another person. Let's add another row, and this one's going to have another column, and that one's going to have one more person's name. So now you see immediately what our table is doing, how each row is associated to a different person, and we're storing that person's data into the first column, and that's going to be repeated over and over. So let's go ahead and save and refresh, and again we see our table is now growing and growing and growing. Well, there's a couple things we're missing automatically, right? Obviously, since we're talking about it, we know that this column is the first name, right? But how come, like on W3 Schools, we see that the first column is special in a sense where it defines what the column is before just showing what the data is, right? So we want to give that special table header or that special row on the top to define what that column is, right? And although technically that's just another column at the top, right? So we'll just add a row, a table row, and then a table column, and we can put first name. We want this this column in this top row to be special, right? We don't want it to be just like anything else. Like if we were to refresh here, it looks just like everything else, right? We want it to pop out because this is the table header. As W3 Schools did, like they molded it, right? This is why always the first row has columns that are called the table header. And instead of defining them with the TD tag, we're going to define it with the TH tag. And that's going to signify and tell our code that, hey, this first row has TH tags, which means that this is the table header. So let's save and refresh. now we see that, hey, it's a little different, right? It's bolded, it stands out, it's different from the data, right? So that's one of the things that we were missing and we applied, is that first row has to be special, it has to be the table header. And then after that, all the other columns later on within the rows are just inputs of data, so they can be marked with the regular column tag, right? So next thing we want to do is add more data, right? We want more than just the first name. So what that's going to mean is for each one of my rows, I need to add an additional column. So let's start with the first row, right? We're going to add a table header. And the second thing I'm going to put is last name. That means now I have to add a column for each one of my rows and put the person's last name. And then here we go, TD again. This is my brother that I just thought of, so I'm going to put last name. And this is also my brother who I thought of, so I'm going to put their last name. And just so he doesn't feel left out, I'm going to put my other brother's name. TD, first name, and then another column for his last name. So now let's save and refresh. And now we see our table looking more and more like a table, right? We have the table headers, each column defining a different type of data, the first name for the first column and the last name for the second column, right? Now let's add an additional column, but this one is going to have more than just text, because you can put absolutely anything you want in between these two tags, right? So in this case, let's go ahead and put the TD tag, or let's start off with the first row, right? Adding the table header, and we're going to put favorite sport, right? And we're going to now have to add an additional column for each one of the rows, which is my brothers or the Hammoudeh family, right? So in the first one, I'm going to put the image tag, because remember, again, I can put anything I want in between these two columns. I just have to define what that is. So in this case, I just put regular text, right? But going on in the future, you might want to put an image here. You might want to put a header here. You might want to put absolutely anything you want in here. You can even put another table within a column. It's all up to you. So I'm just going to put another column for each one of these rows and put the image tag within each one of them. Just put another TD and put image within each one. Put image. Okay, so now let's grab an image like we did in the last lesson. So let's just put football. So let's go put that image right here. I'll put football for the first one, and I'll put a different sport for each one. So there you have it. We put an image for each one of these columns, and we put the picture for each one of them. So let's save, and let's go back to our HTML page and refresh. And now we see, even though it's humongous and we have to change obviously the width like we did last time with the image, we see that each person has their own picture associated or next to their name or with their favorite sport. So let's just go to our code and add a basic style. This time we're going to put anything with image. We're going to say it's width of 100, right? Because we want all the images to be pretty small. So there you have it. Now our table has 3 columns, each one for a different record, each one having a different favorite sport, and it's showing perfectly. But now, even now, like, hey, this looks like a table. I see how we're growing and adding columns and rows and so on and so forth. But how come this table doesn't look like this table, right? With this nice border, these nice, separation between the lines and the rows and the columns. Well, yeah, we have to add styling for that. We have to add CSS for that. So let's go back to our code after we just added all of our HTML properties and code and elements in the rows and columns that we needed. Let's add some styling to this, right? So the first styling I want to add is to the table, right? So let's go ahead and add an ID to our table. And we're going to name it person table. And we're going to reference it in our style to say, hey, get the element with the ID of person table, and let's apply some styling to it. So let's do something, that we haven't done before, a new property that we're going to learn in CSS. That's called border, right? So let's go ahead into our code or into our Google search and put border property CSS like it's showing here, right? And let's click on the first link. And then there we have it, how to write the border style for CSS for our table to have this style, right? So we see the border name, and then it has 3 properties within it, right? The first one showing the thickness of the border that's going to be applied. The second property showing what style you want the border. So this one says solid, so it's going to be a solid line instead of like this one that has a dotted line. And the last one is, of course, the color of the border that you want to have. So we're going to go ahead and put border, and we're going to put 1 pixel of thickness. We're going to make it a solid line, and we're going to make it black. So let's go ahead and save and see what happened to our table. So let's refresh. And now you see, hey, it looks more like a table because now it's being contained and given that nice border to show our table, right? And if we wanted to, just for sake of showing it, let's put a dotted line and let's make it red and save and refresh. And you see the different type of styling we can apply. And of course, border and many of the different styling and properties and CSS you can apply, there's literally hundreds we can apply. So you can research and see, and we're even going to take in future lessons all the different properties and styling components we can apply to a table. Let's go ahead and reapply our black solid border just because it's cleaner and nicer, I guess. And okay, now we still need to add, you know, a little more to our table to make it look more like a table, right? So the second property I want to put is, you know, another border, but this time around the columns, right? So every single column, I want it to have a border as well. Now, of course, we could go ahead in each column and put class name or ID and then write the rule for that, but that seems repetitive, right? We just want, you know, a simple line of CSS to apply all the columns with a simple border. And hey, we know how to do that, right? Because one, we did it with the image where all images have a width of 100 pixels. We also want to do the same thing to our columns, right? So we're going to put TD and we're going to put open and close curly braces, and we're going to say anything with the TD tag, I want that to have a width a border of, you know, the same, or we could change it up a little. We can put 3 pixels and we can put dashed and we can put blue. Save, refresh. And now we see each one of our columns having that border applied to it. So you see that, you know, this border is blue, it's dashed, and it's, you know, a little thick. So now it's looking more and more like a table. How about these headers? We want them to look, you know, a little different too, because we want them to pop out and stand out as, you know, the main the main headers, right? So we could do either reference the same way we did with the columns by putting TH and then putting a special style for each one of them, or we can go ahead and just, you know, this is the top row, right? We only want this row to be special, so we can go ahead and put an ID or a class name to this special row. We can call it header row, right? And then in here we can go ahead and put ID of header row. I want that to have, you know, something that me and you used a bunch of times. Background color of light gray or light blue. Let's go light blue. Save. And now we see our first row has this nice little background color to signify and make that header row pop out. Let's go ahead and even apply more styling. We can even say, hey, TH, which is the table header columns, I want them to have a color, which is font color, of white. And let's save and refresh. And now we see more and more styling being applied to our table. And that's basically all a table is, right? For this basic lesson and introduction onto tables. And of course, later on, we're going to take more and more information about the tables. However, just to recap what we did again, just to make sure everyone's on the same pace and keeping up of what we did, we added this main table element, right? And of course, all of our table code is going to go inside of this element. We said a table has many rows, right? So you'll see, you know, this row, and then you'll see another row, and then you'll see another row and another row, and how many rows that we want. We said that the first row has to be a special type of row, right? And it's not going to have normal columns. It's going to have table headers. So we're going to use the TH tags to make those columns stand out. And then later on, each row has to have the same amount of columns, right? But now we can just use regular columns. It doesn't have to be THs anymore because this is just regular data. So we're going to signify or represent regular ordinary columns with the TD tag. So there you have it. Each column is represented, and in the first two columns we just put anything, right? We just put text. But as we said, you can put absolutely anything you want inside a column. So for our last column, we just put an image, and we just repeated this over and over for each entry or record of data. And then we have this very simple, very quick table that we put together in HTML and applying some basic styling to it. And that's all we're going to take today about HTML tables. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and look out for future videos. Peace out.